Hey there, Crackers and Saurus Rexes. I'm back. Volume 2 of Moodswing, some 3.5 months later. Pathetic, I know. I still have ambitions to make this quite a bit more regular, but laziness, as well as the scope of what I wanted to do for Volume 2, made this take far too long. I've never done a political plea before, and I'm just a dumb comedian who doesn't know much about such things. So Wikipedia was a tremendous help. I had to read a lot, and I'm still not certain I've done a satisfactory job, but nonetheless, if you have American voting rights, vote Ron Paul 2012. If I were ever to teach philosophy or any similar such subject, I'd encourage my students to engage with the subject matter in a negative fashion first. That is to say, what troubles you or what don't you like about the theories espoused? Answering, "What's your problem, playa?" is the best way to understand something, in my opinion. I don't like Ron Paul on immigration. He thinks it's best to keep America's borders secure because illegal aliens put undue strain on the welfare system. Now, I find that kind of peculiar because the U.S. is a nation built off the sweat of immigrants' brows. Now, it's true that it's a different situation with Mexicans coming over the border in 2012 than it was with Europeans arriving in ships some 150 years ago, but at the risk of sounding like a positive racist, in my limited experience, immigrants are willing to work more, harder, and crappier jobs than us whiteys, so I disagree with Paul here. Libertarian Ron Paul is essentially a free market fundamentalist champion of civil liberties who absolutely seeks to limit government spending and involvement in individuals' private lives. I've heard him say, the militarists and the welfarists are actually on the same side of the argument. Really, to me, having your armies shoot people versus, say, having your doctors give them a free heart transplant seems like the opposite side of the argument. But of course, in his mind, both would represent overuse of public funds. To me, one's civil liberties are most greatly protected when they are first able to have their basic food, shelter, and clothing needs met. And if I were king of the world, I'd want to make it so that every single individual on the planet is able to meet those needs, irrespective of what they do. You're not sick, finger your nose all day, you still get your food, shelter, clothing. Now, I'm not for total income equality by any means, but I think for everyone to have those necessities, as I mentioned, is a fundamental human right, and anything less is simply unjust. Now, Paul says things like churches and charities ought to take care of the sick and the poor. Hey, man, I'm totally fine with that if that's possible. This aid doesn't have to come from the government, but I'd question if individuals would actually be generous enough in donations to allow the churches and charities to mete out sensible care. In my view, if government does not guarantee the food, shelter, clothing, necessities of its population, why have government at all? And here, Ron Paul wants to limit the power of the federal government, which I think is fantastic. However, a common theme that kept coming up in my reading was to have issues decided on a state-by-state basis. Issues like gay marriage and capital punishment. I think that's problematic because I don't see that as protecting the rights of individuals. Let's say two ladies in Tennessee want to get married. Their state won't allow it. Well, how is that any less of a despotic restriction on their freedom to live the way they choose if the government of Tennessee says they can't get married instead of the president, the senate, or Congress? I like the idea of decentralizing power, but again, if a state can interfere in people's private lives like that, really, how is it any different than if the federal government can, except maybe to say the number of people over which they have jurisdiction is less. Another one of the issues Paul thinks should be decided on a state-by-state basis is the right to abortion. I was actually quite surprised to find out he's pro-life, stating, if you can't protect life, how can you protect liberty? Apparently, when he was a med student, he witnessed a late-term abortion where a 2.5-pound fetus, or baby if you like, was put into a bucket, screaming and crying. Now, I can see what kind of impact that would have. And you know what? I'm not actually certain on my own feelings on rights to abortion. If baby wasn't grown in a human body, there'd be no issue. Like, I can't imagine if a woman laid eggs and carried them around like penguins, anyone would say it's cool to smash those eggs before they're hatched, right? But the problem is, of course, that babies are grown in women's bodies. Now, there's great debate about when a fetus actually becomes a baby. Some say the moment of conception, others much later. I think my own personal view here is that no government, federal or state, or provincial, in us Canadians' case, should be able to legislate that before the allotted term, a woman has the right to abort or not. She should be the one to decide. I have to admit, though, I'm a bit shaky on this, and certainly respect the other side of the argument. That is to say that you shouldn't ever end life except maybe in self-defense, or, if the woman's own life is threatened by the pregnancy. I was also quite surprised to find out libertarians actually have a position on the environment. Before researching, I'd assumed that the position would simply be that government has no place with regulating the affairs of industry, things like carbon taxes, and the market ought to operate unfettered, and businesses ought to pollute as they see fit, basically. But that's not quite it. The position these libertarians have is called free market environmentalism. And Paul subscribes to this. Belief here is that we take better care of things we own. I.e., if a lumber company owns a forest outright, it is not likely to clear cut or wipe out trees too fast because it would destroy its product, go out of business too quickly, and lose or not make the most money it could. Opposed to government regulations, free market environmentalism calls for protection of private property. So let's say I live in the vicinity of a big, smelly sewage plant. Every time I go out in my backyard, I smell that stinky sewage. Now, the market environmentalist would have me, along with some neighbors too perhaps, make a tort claim where I call for the sewage plant to recover the loss of my lovely smelling backyard, which could ultimately force them to move. I'm pretty sure these tort claims aren't currently legal, but the market environmentalists would like to make them possible. Another belief is that the market unfettered would not cause overconsumption of resources because the laws of supply and demand would naturally prevent overconsumption. I.e., if something is being consumed a lot, it becomes very valuable, making it unaffordable to consume too much. Now, I must confess here, once again, I'm just a dumb comedian. I don't know much about the market or the environment, but my belief is that businesses often try to make as much money as they can, as fast as they can. Now, I'm not sure that, say, a lumber company that I mentioned earlier wouldn't just clear cut the forest and be done in a few years without looking at the bigger picture. If the majority of businesses practice sustainable growth and renew their resources, this could work. I'm also not sure about that supply and demand governing overconsumption. Like, let's say smartphones become the hottest thing. They get scarce, and all the remaining smartphones are $2 million. Well, only the super rich can get smartphones, and that sucks for the rest of us, but, not really a big deal, because nobody really needs a smartphone, right? But what about clean water to drink, Many folks don't have this now, and the demand for clean water will always be high. What if clean drinking water, becomes even more scarce? I think humanity could be plunged into a mega war and ultimately suffer extinction. Is this acceptable to anyone? Once again, as a libertarian, Ron Paul wants to absolutely limit the government's role and would therefore shrink it drastically, downsizing its role tremendously in the lives of individuals and all affairs in the world abroad. For example, he would abolish the U.S. Department of